Hey, everybody, welcome to Movies Worth Talking About, the show where we talk and talk and talk about movies. I'm John Carlos, and I am joined today by Keaghlan Ashley, who you know from Face Off Season 7 and Season 11. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk and talk and talk and talk. It's one of my many good qualities.
Well, I mean, you and I have shot the breeze about horror things in the past.
Hmm.
But I've seen through conversation or just through socials a certain passion for Jennifer's Body, which I've been dying to talk about on the show. So I felt like you were the one.
Well, I feel honored. It's definitely I would say my love is somewhat in realizing the errors of my ways when it first came out and realizing like I was unfortunately in the bandwagon of the unfortunate Megan Fox kind of hate train. I'll admit it. I'm a recovered Megan Fox hater. I was not like other girls. So
But you're
I
on
definitely
board now.
absolutely like I think that like a lot of the hatred we saw with Megan Fox in that era really comes from misogyny. Like the end of the day, it always kind of boils down to that. Um, and yeah, I think I just fell into that kind of trap as a lot of young impressionable girls do when they're that age, where the rest of the world is telling you not to like something, so then you kind of you're like, oh well, I don't want to be seen as stupid or lame for not liking or for liking it, and not being able to like really hold true with your values and stuff. And so I think a big part of my vocal um tendencies with Jennifer's Bodies now is really to kind of, pay respects to, what I was just a dumb kid who didn't realize how good it was. And I think also like it is a part of it too, is I fell victim till I know so many other people did to how badly they promoted the movie when it first came out. And it wasn't geared, it didn't say it didn't look like a movie that said this was for me. It looked like a movie that was for boys. And ale boys are stinky and gross at that age. So why would I want to bother with a movie like that? So unfortunately, I fell victim to that as well. And so I think once I realized how much of this movie is speaking to the core of girlhood and teen girlhoods in particular, I really, complete 180 with my view of the movie.
Yeah, I think I could admit that I wasn't on the hater train, but on the other end of the spectrum of like, from the male perspective, I was falling into like the trope of like, this is Megan Fox. This is what she is. These are her abs. She's leaning over a car in Transformers, and this is what we're gonna
Mm-hmm.
sell her on. And that
Yep.
is,
Megan Fox, pretty. Nothing else is Megan Fox, kind
yeah,
of.
Megan
Yeah.
Fox's thing.
Yeah.
And weirdly enough, I didn't see this in. Okay, I saw it at a test screening.
Oh, okay, cool.
So there wasn't even like marketing to sell me on to then later see like, oh, you're selling this to boys.
Yeah.
But here's the thing that like I don't want to say like I guess I'm ashamed to admit like I wasn't like always on like what was that fucking guy's name? Perez Hilton. But
Hmm.
like there was a huge thing in the media, or at least in that internet age, where they were filming the movie
Yeah.
and like they filmed the lake scene and like those photos, some paparazzi just shot those photos and they went everywhere. So like the perception that I knew was like, oh, there's this movie where Megan Fox is in a lake, and that's all I knew about it when I went to a test screening. And like very quickly, you're like, this is not at all what I thought it was going to be. And I
Hmm.
do know for a fact that like she herself is horrified that like paparazzi shot them filming in the lake. And uh so that's why I say like I'm ashamed, just because like that's all I knew about the movie going into
Yeah.
it. However, uh I feel so heavy. There was a video that came out a few years ago. I don't know if you saw it, where it's Diablo Cody and it's Megan Fox just sitting for half an hour
Mhm.
talking about the movie.
Oh, I don't think I've seen that.
I think it was like produced by Entertainment Tonight, but it's just on YouTube and it's just like 30 minutes of the two of them talking. But they talk about like how poorly it tested, and they talked about how like they tested like a bunch of like 20-year-old males and like how horrible the screening was. And I'm listening to it going, I think she's talking about the screening I was at.
Oh
Because
no.
it was just me and a bunch of sea of like 20-year-old dudes. But
Which
I
is
ended up
what they
really
and
liking it.
yeah, it makes sense that that's like if they so they think the target demographic is because hi, Megan Fox,
Mhm.
then yeah, why would they screen it to anybody else if that's what they're looking for?
Yeah, she said they tested a group of like people who were like really into Juno and then
Okay.
teenage boys, and they're like, this movie's kind of not for either of those people. Um, but I remember hearing her comments about how the notes were just like, this movie needed more boobs, and like,
Of
I
course
think
it did.
yeah, I might have been the only guy that I'm like, the acting in this is really good, like, not what I expected whatsoever. Here you go. But yeah, it was neat because I saw Diablo Cody at the screening, and I got excited. And
Oh,
I'm like,
cool.
ooh,
That's awesome. I
yeah.
just
But
recently listened to a podcast on Juno and how that's kind of aged optically and stuff. And I think she kind of has come to say that she might not have made that film with the way that the world is today in terms of because it's being kind of pigeonholed as not to make this a Juno podcast, but they turned it into a pro life kind of speak piece. And so she's like, that's not at all my intention for that movie. And so I think it's interesting to see how kind of movies age based on like the circumstances around them then and now.
I know. I mean, I used to talk about movies and how they aged from like the 80s and 90s, but now we're getting to a point where we can just talk about how a movie has aged within 10 years
Oh yeah,
because it
absolutely. I
feels
mean,
like
even
parts of our culture are shifting so rapidly in a good way. But
oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, even like in the early 2000s, like we're talking about the internet age of how kind of cruel we were as a society to women in and celebrity in media because like you think about like this was around the same wave where we saw like the Britney hate and this is where we saw like the Paris Hilton and the like the celebrity like kind of over indulgence and we saw so much of it like all of these girls kind of being the target and the harassment and like how different we see those same celebrities from then to now and like how all
hmm,
of them are starting to get kind of like a resurgence and hey we were kind of shittier than we should have been to you basically
I
and
feel like that's happening to Paris Hilton right now, isn't it?
oh, absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
she's definitely because I mean she had her documentary and that talked about like how much of Paris Hilton was just a brand. Like that version of Paris was very much a calculated choice. And you can even see it in like House of Wax and how they promoted the movie then was let's really market it towards her sex tape and let's market it towards
Mm.
these
Oh
teen
yeah.
boys where it's like she's actually a really decent character in that movie. And like that movie's still flaps. It's still like within that same time frame like I'm a House of Wax like fan for life. Like it's a good movie. There's it's got its there's some moments for sure. There's some I don't think any movie is really perfect in my like I like there's always something you can critique about any movie in my opinion. But I do think like it goes harder than it should have for sure.
I think Paris as a character, I prefer the Paris in Simple Life, which was reality
Okay.
TV. But I mean that these are two characters. Like,
Oh, absolutely.
yeah,
It's, I mean, most reality television is fabricated and there's very, like, if you want something really real, you have to watch it from the source and like unedited. And you're
yeah.
still seeing a character of a person when you see like that version of Paris Hilton.
Well, the other thing that I think has shifted a bit too, aside from looking back and sort of public apologies towards that, um, how do I word this? It feels like feminism in the last 10 years has been a little bit less judgmental than it used to be 10, 20 years ago towards the idea of like Britney, Megan Fox, femme, makeup. Like we've
Hmm.
embraced the idea of femme in a way where it might have been more scrutinized 20 years ago.
Yeah, I definitely think that there like has been layers of feminism and how it's been unpacked and how it's been perceived. But like you could even still see it now in terms of like the reception is still pretty critical towards women. Like think about like the Barbie movie now, like how that reception is still being very like, oh well, if you're feminine, it's this is hating men kind of, and it's like you're missing the point of, and not that I've seen it, I've just seen the discourse happening online, and it's still like you can't have something that's targeted for women and not have it receive vitriol from you know men that choose to misinterpret the source
Mm.
material.
Yeah, I feel like no matter what wave of feminism society will be in, there's always going to be that,
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
no matter what. Um, I, I don't know if this is the greatest segue, but the idea that
No worries. I got real heady real quick. So.
yeah, no, it just you triggered a line to me because it always sticks with me, which is the since we're on the subject of whether feminism versus the way men interpret things, which just and talking about Barbie and just making me think of patriarchal structures and stuff. The idea in the movie where and I'm just jumping right into the movie where
No,
where
absolutely.
Megan says like these are weapons, like these are smart bombs when it comes to like Needy's boobs.
Yeah.
Like to me, there's a payoff later in the movie because essentially that's what Megan is. She is using her femininity
Hmm.
as a weapon.
Oh,
Uh,
absolutely.
and to me, to a certain degree, like she's not wrong. There's been many a stand-up routine about how when it comes to sexuality and femininity, like women actually hold a lot of power. And then I always had this horrible voice in my head. I remember just Tim Allen going, "Yeah, but too bad, like men still own everything." So there's this like I don't know. I just that one line really triggers to me a lot of things
Yeah.
about power and how much power uh, was within this story
Hmm.
femininity has. And yet, just like with that Tim Allen line, and just like how everything in this world is still kind of ruled by men, uh, we still have like a band murdering
Hmm.
Jennifer like immediate like 5 minutes after that line happens, which is
Hmm.
just to me like a manifestation of everything I just said within like a 5 minute scene of the movie. Because
Oh,
even
absolutely.
with the power she wields, it kind of doesn't matter because like essentially a group of men will come and just ruin it.
I mean, if you think about it, like it is taking her femininity and like because they're looking for a virgin is really what it comes down to, and they misinterpret her as a virgin, and that's why the spell goes horribly awry, and why she survives is because they're viewing this girl as chaste, and that's how they're going to steal her virginity and basically for their own end and for their own power. And I think that it says a lot about like the way that young men view virginity and even how us as a society view it is like this is something to covet, but also it's something for me to take away. And by doing so, they, it inadvertently causes her to become the succubus that is still able to take, young man after young man's life. Um, I'm not sure exactly sure where I'm going with this, but I definitely think it's an interesting commentary on like, yes, they like there are these men trying to steal her power, and but then it's somehow because they view her as something that she really isn't, it causes her to gain even more power in a way. And
Yeah,
I think it's a really interesting commentary. And like just because you underestimate somebody, like especially in women, like if you're underestimating women, that like you know the chances of retaliation are pretty high.
I mean, I'm really glad you said that because it just clicked for me the idea that we're talking about stealing her virginity because of a demonic exercise, but I didn't think about till right now the idea that essentially they are acting, socially speaking, as predators.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Um, so light bulb.
I mean, I mean,
And then
they're
essentially she turns
absolutely,
that around and becomes the predator.
yeah.
So it becomes very yin yang.
Yeah, I think it's from the get-go, like we're supposed to view this band as, like they're kind of every atypical like band of that era. And like you even it's interesting news because it's I know Diablo's making, or I'm surmising that she is, but she's definitely I think making a point about bands of that era that still like did prey on young girls of that age. Like they, are these 20 something guys that all see this young basically jailbait as something valuable, and it's kind of the ultimate like, you know, metaphor for taking, these young girls, preying on them and getting what they want out of them and then throwing them away.
Yeah.
So
In fact, I've never dived deep into the soundtrack, but I remember
Mhm.
recalling that like a lot of the songs in the movie are specifically selected because they deal with the use of women from like a male perspective, and I need to like visit that at some point on my life's to-do list, but
Yeah.
that's got to be intentional.
Oh, I think that like as a writer and as a director, I think that Diablo Cody is really masterful in like she doesn't really take like superfluous choices. They're always like a reason for everything that she's doing. And like you see that in Juno and you see that in, Jennifer's Body. Um, and I think it's really interesting that we also don't really have much interaction with adults other than like very briefly Needy's mom, and very briefly we get kind of just the stunted teacher that we see, and that's kind of it. There's no other real like influence in terms of these adults, and like there's nobody really around to kind of, and even like the adults we do see, there's so like, because Needy's mom is a nurse, and so she's gone all the time, and so
Yeah.
there's not really a lot of influence in terms of like, so all of these kids are basically knocking around like kind of unattended.
Yeah, I mean, if anything, I when Jennifer's mom walks in towards the end, I always go, "Oh
Yeah.
yeah, Jennifer apparently has a mom." Like,
Yeah, that's, I mean, you're like, where are all these parents? And like, I think you do briefly see, I forget Needy's boyfriend's name for some reason.
Chip?
Chip, thank you. Yes, I believe. I should have taken notes.
I'm pretty sure it's Chip. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure too. Um, but yeah, you like, you don't see any of them, and it's very much for a reason, I think.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I think at the end of the day, when you're telling this particular story, it's the core of it is so rooted in their relationship, whichever definition of that word you want to apply, that literally Chip, their teacher, and any other guy, it's like, to me, it's no accident that like all the men in this movie are secondary characters.
oh,
There's
absolutely.
no primary male character at all,
Mhm.
and I think for whatever reason with the story they're telling, the parents just don't need to go there. I mean, if you want, like, you don't need to, but there is a version of this movie where you have like an Amy Poehler cool mom, and you go, oh well, that's why Jennifer can get away with, so,
Yeah. I
that.
don't think that's necessary. Like, I think having that, like, because it does then put the focus on the microcosm that is the high school. And I think a lot of like teenagers tend to not really take their parents into consideration when it comes to like, they're like,
Yeah,
they want to be adults so badly that like, as much as they can kind of push their parents out, they're going to anyway. And so I think it's like, I think that's part of what like makes Chip's character so endearing, is because he does have that relationship with his mom that none of the other characters really do. And
yeah.
like it kind of grounds him into a more youthful place, and like obviously the bowl cut helps. Like he's not your atypical like leading, like even if he's a love interest in like a teen girl movie, he's not your atypical like love interest you're expecting typically. you know well, we also don't get the nerdy girl getting a love interest usually
No.
either, and so it's interesting to see like the layers of like his character, and how like they kind of emasculate him in his own way before Jennifer has anything to do with him.
Oh yeah. Even just like Needy describing, I forget the other guy's name, but the little goth guy who likes poetry,
Yes.
and just his immediate like jealousy of like, wait,
Mhm.
there's a guy who does poetry and you have a remotely positive thing to say about him. uh yeah, I mean, I never really thought of how emasculated he was. I mean, comedically, I guess, yeah, I think you're right. I just define it as things I laugh at him for. But
Well, and yeah, like that's obviously there's that point, but like it really makes it like he is an accessory in his own way to Needy. And at the end of the day, like while he like kind of rotates around, like Needy's the sun and he's just the moon that rotates around her, he's not really important to her in the way that like Jennifer is. And I think that that's an interesting, like perspective we don't typically see with most movies, let alone most horror
yeah,
movies. Um, there's very few instances of kind of the relationship that like just a girl on like whether it be if you want to read into the queer take with Needy and Jennifer, which I absolutely do. But I do think even as just a friendship level, that's not something that we see commonly in horror at all. Like most of the time, if we do get two girls, they're typically sisters.
Hmm.
And that's the dynamic we're always in play with. And I think it's a really interesting dynamic to play with because there is like kind of that like homoerotic like um kind of relationship that can happen even with like straight friend girlfriends. Like you're at that age that you're not necessarily sure about who you are, and so there is a level of exploration that happens. Whether how overt it is depends on like the relationships and like the people, but like there is something to that there's that like kind of jealousy and friendship thing that kind of coincides with this romantic or pseudo romantic relationship that could happen with your friend that is never explored in horror or in most movies period. So I think it's a really interesting movie for that reason also.
I mean, I hadn't really considered it, but like, you're right. I feel like in a different producer's hands, or a director who didn't have as much of an understanding of the material, Chip would have been cast by like a hunky 30 year
Oh,
old
absolutely.
30-year old guy, and 10 years later we would have talked about how miscast he was for the part.
I mean,
And you're right,
yeah.
the bowl haircut, all of it. If essentially Needy and Jennifer are operating on an emotionally more mature level, it's no mistake that they cast such a boyish performer.
Mhm.
Because I mean, the scene where he and Needy are having sex, and she's screaming from the horrors that Jennifer's committing. The
Yeah.
fact that one, that he thinks it's him, but his performance of like his understanding that this might be like, it is so juvenile,
Oh yeah,
and
absolutely.
it's like a great performance.
Yeah, I think it's probably some of the most like accurate representations of like kids having sex. I also think I like that the fact that it isn't their first time either. Like they don't make this big pomp and circumstance about it being some kind of new and unique experience. Like they've done this
Oh yeah.
before, but it's still very much like it there still is that awkwardness that I think like teen sexuality inherently dispossesses because it's so new. And I love his performance in that respect because it's definitely like kind of that bumbling like, oh yeah, I'm doing a great like yeah, that's me. Like
It
I love the choice of that. It's so funny.
uh you unpacked a lot after we talked about. Yeah, so
I've thought a lot about this movie probably more than like I think because I spent so much of my youth like unnecessarily hating it. And I don't even think I hated the movie. I just didn't touch it with a 10-foot pole because Megan Fox was attached. And it's a huge disservice as a horror fan and a huge disservice to like all of the people involved. It's a great funny movie.
oh, and also once you see what the story is and what the role of Jennifer is, she's like perfect for the part. You are,
Mm-hmm.
in fact, like her image is actually kind of what helps sell
Oh yeah.
what her image is within the school is too. So,
Mm-hmm. Oh,
but
and I love her commitment to the bit and like every she's so content with like getting to the ugliness of that character also like she has no problem spitting black vile goo and she doesn't mind being like made up to look like as toe up as she can be
right.
and then for makeup like I gotta give her a lot of credit for like just going full in. She fully commits to it and there's, without any hesitation. And I think that's really awesome to see. And I really wish she had gotten more of these kinds of opportunities as roles
Yeah.
because I would have been so much fun. Like she's also a great comedic actress. Like there's so many levels of nuance that like Transformers never would have been able to give her. And so it's kind of a shame that we lost a lot of that
Oh,
opportunity because
absolutely.
of how cruel the industry was to her.
She got an opportunity to sort of play up on the bombshell trope and still be
Mm-hmm.
funny with how to lose friends and was it how to lose friends and alienate people with Simon
Mm-hmm.
Pegg. and also This Is 40, where like she gets to show her comedic chops while she was still kind of being typecast. So props to her for that. But it's funny because when you said she's down to like, kind of allow herself to get a little like ugly and dirty, my for half a second thought you meant like her inner character and not so much the makeup and the black vomit.
Oh, I mean both.
Yeah, because the thing that one of the more obvious dynamics about the movie that I really like is there's so much about her before she ever gets possessed where you're like, okay, like you're selfish, you're rude, you're manipulative and controlling. And then afterwards, there's still some of the things she says just come out just like a blunt hammer. Like they're still wicked. And then halfway through the movie, I at least found myself asking, how much of this is the demon in her, and how much of it is her? And I
Oh
think
yeah.
also that's probably the intended thing I'm supposed to be feeling. Um, but I just there are times the things that she's saying as a character are not cutesy and glamorous, and they are kind of, for lack of a better word, shitty. But she
Yeah.
commits so hard into like this is who I am, and also the fact that she allows herself to sail that and not even concern herself with how it sounds.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's just a big bold swing for a character that I appreciate.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, they say best what the hell is a teenage girl, and like there's like so much to unpack there, just with like how kind of vicious girls can be at that age. And like I mean like teenagers in general and like kids in general, like they can be so vicious, and I think that's a really like great like example of showing that with her character.
Yeah, vicious is a good word for it because I'm usually growing up, surrounded by boys, and even if I'm with boys and girls, I've never been just alone with girls because I am not one. So, but boys can be incredibly vicious, and the idea of what we think we're saying is funny.
Hmm.
But I don't know, I found it jarring the first time I saw this. I'm like, oh, like Jennifer can be that vicious too.
Yeah. Well, I think it's interesting because like a lot of the times when like male anger comes to a head, it comes to violence. And you see like in most like whether it's either, whatever layer you want to take that to, like most of the time the fruition of that anger results in violence. Whereas typically girls aren't allowed to have that level of anger. We're not allowed to, be seen as that because especially as we get older, we're, seen as, hard to work with, or we're seen as bitchy, or we're seen as, so girls, especially like that's kind of the training ground is high school where we learn to kind of play a quieter game and play like, and not that it's a
Hmm.
good thing at all, but like it's definitely having to learn to navigate like being able to have that anger and have that vitriol towards another person, but then it still has to play like it's more of a mind game than anything else.
But isn't it
And
neat that Jennifer doesn't play that game?
no, I love that.
Yeah.
I mean, and like I also think it's cool like because we do get like the physicality of the two girls towards the end, which like we also it's not ever sexualized. I mean, it is, but it isn't. Like most of the scenes that we get with them being physically violent towards each other, just the two of them. And so, like, it's them getting to kind of unleash and like I going to like Mean Girls is kind of the best way I think about it. And like it's probably because your shirt, but it definitely is like it's kind of allowing us to like have that kind of like visceral anger moment that we're not really entitled to or allowed to have.
Yeah.
So.
And we're talking, and that anger leads to the other thing, which is the physical violence that she conveys in the movie is also something that we don't typically see.
Oh yeah, we don't. I mean, we usually if we get like a femme fatale, it's very rarely coming from a place of like that deep. Like we don't get like even in our possession movies, the woman is always the victim.
Yeah.
It's very rare that we get a possession movie where the woman is in full complete control of her faculties and able to just wreak havoc on her own. It's always like you see it in The Exorcist, you see it in
Hmm.
the Emily Rose, you see it in like any number of possession movies where it's like always they're confined to a bed and or
Yeah.
confined to a home, and you don't
Insidious 3.
it's a thing. Like there's so many different aspects to it where I'm like, you don't get even even when we're in the ultimate power and we're a literal demon, we're still kind of confined to what is appropriate and what men see as like there's always that aspect of like the man has to control the woman because it's always a priest, it's always like some guy that's going to save her from the demon. Whereas in this movie, it's there's no man coming to save her. There's no, like young boy coming, like all the dudes die, and at the end of it, like Needy gets the demon.
It's what you made me think of was that we do sort of see that character. It's just never in this thing, but like it's usually like the femme fatale in like thrillers,
Mhm. Or the
like
action.
your basic instincts, if
Yes.
you will, where
Okay, maybe
it's either
Species would be a good one, but like,
yeah, that's the closest where, but like
yeah.
it's usually either a queer coded or blatantly queer female murderess.
Hmm.
But it's usually never in this specific type of movie. So I feel like they took like Sharon Stone for Basic Instinct and put her into an Exorcist type story where we don't normally get that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um,
Or in a
so,
teen girl movie.
but that's almost like the genius about it is that's such a perfect fit,
Hmm.
but we don't often get to see it. The other thing about Jennifer's violence to me in the movie, at least the metaphor I always get, and this is even without even diving into any of the like the queer relationship of the movie,
Hmm.
but just the idea that she is so confident, right? It is early 2000s midriff makeup, so put together. Um, and the fact that she is using her sexuality to lure men to death always comes across to me as like this very like conservative fear of like the confident woman, the
Hmm.
sexually not demure, like not hiding anything, and whether it's just their own femininity or their internal sexuality, but putting it on Front Street and owning
Hmm.
it is scary. And now we have like, not to me, but considered scary. And
Yeah.
here we have a movie that essentially, if you want to look at it, is playing on that fear.
Oh yeah, she's literally being demonized for her sexuality and literally being demonized for her empowerment in her sexuality.
And that's literally all I thought the movie was about, like the first two times I ever saw it.
Hmm.
Um, and it wasn't until like years later when there started to become like this like justice for Megan Fox and also like
Hmm.
justice for Jennifer's body that I started hearing the words queer cinema thrown in, and I went, "Wait, what?
Go on.
Huh? That's interesting. I never thought about that." And now I've seen it several times, and I go, "Well, duh." But it took me a while to get there.
Oh yeah,
But
like if you watch it, like Needy is absolutely in love with her. Like 100% in love with her.
absolutely, the first time I saw it, I just thought like, "What? They're just friends, and they're in a toxic relationship, and it's a friendship, right?"
Yeah.
That first scene where they're at the pep rally, and she's just like lighting up and staring at her, and
Hmm.
and Jennifer's like staring back, and that girl leans in. She's like, "Oh my god, you guys are lesbian gay." I just thought it was like a funny line, haha. But
Hmm.
to me, that opening scene is the entire movie.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but yeah, I didn't get a read on that at all, and also I think it took I think it took the world. I'm sure there are people, absolutely, there are people who the second it came out were like, got it, queer cinema for all their personal reasons. But I think the
Hmm.
greater public at large, at least in my observation, there's more obviously, but I always
Hmm.
characterize three stereotypical things that uh, constitute queer cinema. One is if there's like a queer creator involved,
Hmm.
writer, director. Two, if the story is blatantly a queer story. And three, the one that I find more interesting is the movie that gets embraced
By the
after
queer
the fact.
community. Yeah.
Yes. And for whatever those reasons are. And Jennifer's Body, to me, at least for my perception, falls into that category. And it just took me a million years to kind of go, oh, oh. And one of them is just because there's a lot of essays because I I wanted to sort of read up on what is it about this movie that I didn't see the first several times. And if anyone out there is, I'm not going to attempt to recap anything. It's not my experience, and I'm no expert. But if you literally type in Jennifer's body LGBTQ, you will find so many essays. And I don't say this in a bad way, but they're all very similar, and they all start out with like, I was this age when I saw it. This was part of my journey. It helped me discover this. And they're all written from very personal experiences, and it just helped me understand not one, themes about the movie that I was not privy to when I was like in my 20s, but two, that people aren't isolated in this feeling, in this journey that a lot of people have had. I'm fumbling with words here, but I'm just saying there's a lot of very personal essays out there, and the fact that a lot of people have the same story to me is a good thing, not a bad thing.
Yeah. I think for me, like personally, because it wasn't ever a queer awakening for me, it's interesting to like look at it from like hindsight, because I definitely, like, I have had my own kind of journey with exploring myself and my sexuality, and I can identify with Needy a lot in this movie. And having heterosexual friends and not having a word for like, just I love this person, but like, oh, it's just a friend. But then there's definitely that layer that's like there's a little bit more to it. And so I can definitely identify a lot with Needy, and like kind of the obliviousness in which like she loves Jennifer, and like what she allows Jennifer to kind of get away with her. I think there's a lot of young queer girls, and probably even young queer boys, that allow their friends to treat them in certain ways that they wouldn't necessarily let them, because they're just desperate for that attention and they don't want it to go away. And I definitely think it's interesting to like kind of watch that and unpack it as an adult, because that's obviously wasn't language for myself. This wasn't something that I allowed myself really to unpack with this movie at that age. I think it would have probably benefited me, although I don't necessarily actually know if I would have had the same reading on it if I didn't experience this movie in the way that I did.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that, because there's so much about their relationship that I feel like I'm surprised that someone like Needy would allow this level of either harsh treatment or manipulation to continue. But when viewed through this prism, and especially when you're young and you don't fully understand it yet.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like you said, like there's a love, and then there's a love that you don't. I don't know. There's something to me that it works about being a teenager. Not to say that you can't also be older and still be discovering and trying to understand your feelings, but I feel like even if you're a basic cishet like me, like you still are trying to understand yourself on a million levels when you're like our brains are like little mush when we're like 18, 17. I'm surprised I could even like tie my own shoelaces by the time I could like write a check to, balance a checkbook.
It's also interesting to watch media that's technically targeted for the 16 to like, I'd say even 20 range, where it's like rewatching anything, especially from the like late 90s to early 2000, where you have these like 30-year-olds playing these characters. And you can even see it now with like Riverdale, where like these are really, really emotionally mature themes, and really like they're banging every other day. And like maybe that was other people's experiences, but that wasn't mine. So it's definitely interesting to seeing the like Hollywood filter in terms of like growing up and being a teenager versus what their actual reality is. Because I want to say that this is actually a pretty like closer, or at least for me, I would say it's a closer interpretation, because all of them are over 18, because that's how Hollywood works, and you have to like, they're never gonna cast 17, 16-year-olds. I mean, they do more now, but
you can shoot less in the day because
you can shoot less, exactly. So like all 9 times out of 10, your 16-year-olds are always going to be like 19, 20. And so like they're getting better, but it's still not great. And so it's interesting to see kind of these characters where like I was rewatching Buffy the other day, and Xander's getting his first apartment, and this is the second year they're in college, so he's maybe 20 years old, and he's like, they're like positioning him like he's this adult, and I'm like, you were like 20 years old. How is this like? No, that doesn't work like that. And like we were like they were creating these molds that we felt like we needed to fit into, even though they weren't realistic at all. And like the maturity level and everything is kind of aged up a little bit and skewed up a little higher when you talk about Hollywood and stuff like that, or even entertainment in general. And so it's interesting to like kind of revisit films that are geared towards the 16, 17, 18-year-old demographic and be like, what exactly is like your perception of it versus what reality is.
No, I mean, in that regard, even though this is a horror movie, I feel like this is a healthier kind of movie for a teenager to see, as far as
I agree.
speaking to what they're going through and also depicting. Again, no one in here is emancipated and getting through an apartment at 20, like
Yeah.
you're saying. I don't want to say, hey, for kids, but
No. It definitely I will say like it does feel like it's a more kind of truthful like lens on teenage life, and like Needy feels like she is in high school, and
oh
Chip
yeah,
feels like he's in high school. Megan Devin, like she looks like she could be in high school, but also looks like she's trying not to look like she's in high school.
yeah.
And I think that that's an interesting, especially like in the very early parts of the movies where you can see that she's trying to kind of put on her big girl shoes when she goes up to the band and tries to like act older than she is and puts herself in situations that are well beyond her maturity level, and like trying to like go toe to toe with these guys in the band, and that's eventually what ends up her demise.
Uh, yeah, because I mean, the most childish she ever seems as a teenager is when she's literally confronted with adults in her 20s. One of the
Mm-hmm.
little things that like not bugs me, but I guess bugs me is when you see a descriptor of the movie or any review of the movie and they refer to her as a popular girl. Because I
Mm-hmm.
get that she's maybe more like glamorous and more put together in an adult way compared to other teenagers in the movie. But at
Mm-hmm.
no point do they show. I feel like this came out too shortly after Mean Girls.
Mm-hmm.
It really is just her and Needy. I
Yeah.
don't see a bunch of kids always like talking about like what Regina George is wearing. Like that's not an
Yeah.
element to this movie.
No, I think that there's maybe layers to it where like you can see it in kind of Needy's perception of Megan, or excuse me, in Jennifer, where she does look at like, oh, I'm so lucky she's still with me. Like you can like in that respect, I could see where it kind of plays into the popularity schism because by all intents and purposes, like her character would never be seen with my character if this were really like a teen, high school movie.
Right.
And so I think like you see it in that aspect, but you don't see it any other place.
You
Like,
don't. I just don't like that journalists and certain people have projected that onto it. Simply because of like her energy or like her costume or and I don't want to say that this makes the movie realistic, but I can remember my own high school experience. There were, in fact, a lot of quote unquote popular people, usually
mhm,
involved with like cheerleading or ASB or whatever. And
yeah,
then there was this very specific group of like two or three girls that were like super Barbied out, had like the hair done, full makeup, really like neat, expensive looking outfits. Wouldn't call them popular. They were very
yeah,
like Jennifer, but they weren't like the queen bees of the school.
yeah,
And that's all to say that's totally a thing. And in a weird way, kind of like with John Hughes movies, like a lot of the like when you look at Breakfast Club, like parents don't really factor into that
mhm,
aside from some problematic stuff with John Bender, there's a lot of emotional truth to like 80% of that movie. And there's something about Jennifer's body that despite demonic possession, there's a lot of emotional truths
mhm,
that like even as a dude, a straight dude, I can still look at Needy and I can still uh see I've been in friendships where I will allow or I have allowed, you know, someone can be their energy can be selfish, their energy can be jealous and manipulative. But like, oh, but your sun is shining on me, and like, yeah, let's whatever you say,
Mhm.
and I think almost any gender or demographic can relate to an uneven friendship and how exciting it can be to be going out to the bar with your friend and blah blah blah. And
Mhm.
so the story of Jennifer's body of escaping a toxic friendship, I think is relatable to anyone. But then if you
Oh,
want to apply,
absolutely.
but then you can dig deeper and you know onions
I
have
think that,
layers. Because to me, I mean,
yeah.
she's ultimately, I mean, to me, if there's, I know it seems sad that she stabs her best friend and ends up in, obviously she escapes the asylum, but like to me, if there's any like happiness to the movie, it is the story of, I don't want to call it one-sided because it shifts. Um, Jennifer isn't one note, but if I'm going to speak in a one note term,
Yeah.
um, it is nice to see within this queer, if you want it to be, relationship,
Hmm.
the happy ending is she does escape a very toxic situation. And that's, I don't know. I don't want to call it a happy ending, but
Yeah, it's a little like, I think there's definitely some nuance to it in terms of like, I think that's probably what I love most about the movie is there are so many different layers that you can interpret and like you can piecemeal what you want out of the movie. But I do think that like if anybody wins, it's the demon in this the
uh
scenario in this movie. Because it is like, yes, she's leaving this toxic friendship, but at the same time, it's like, what would that friendship have looked like and evolved as they got older and maybe both came to terms with the fact that they're madly in love with each other, if you want to take it from the queer lens. And like, so it does kind of cut a relationship off. And like, I think that that character is a character that is capable of growth. And I think if anything, like maybe she loves Needy more than, and that's a part of the closeted narrative too, is that because she loves Needy more than she wants to admit, she's, doing quote unquote toxic things to her best friend because she doesn't want to acknowledge that she actually loves her more than she wants to let on. And like there's plenty of stories where that happened. Like it's the whole adage of like you bully what like he's like it's the whole boy and girl, like the boy bullies the girl he likes, which I think we should never encourage, but there is something to that a lot of, that's how it's what it's the aggressive affection kind of thing where it's like we like something so much we want to bite it, like um I think there is something to that. And I think if like Jennifer as a character was able to kind of release the demon and was able to like grow up a little bit and say, hey, actually I'm a lesbian and I want to just be with my best friend, then that, toxic aspect could resolve. But that's then also opens up the question of whether Needy should stay and deal with that. And so it's, what would have happened had that movie, that's a different movie. So
yeah, if anything, I look at where she's going now and I at least feel happy because obviously there's going to be remorse. There's going to be, it's a tragedy that this childhood friend and all your ups and downs. Obviously, I'm sure you don't want it to end this way, despite how probably unhealthy at this point in your life it is for you. However, you talked about how where it could have gone potentially, at least where the movie ends, even though the demon wins, I like to think from this point forward, Needy, it's only uphill from here, hopefully.
it's
Or
her own autonomy,
yeah,
basically.
like she's in a great position for growth, is all I'm saying. And that's, a silver
Well, then it's
lining.
like, because obviously she goes off and kills the band, but then it's like where does she go from there? Because like
Right.
you've and that's even like you can see that like still at the end of the day she still loves Jennifer because she goes out of her way to kill this band that started this whole
This
thing.
whole thing.
And so it's like it's her final act of love to her friend, even though she murdered
Again, complicated relationship.
her.
I'm really glad you brought up the physical, like the bullying, because I often consider that such a, again, from my limited viewpoint, such a male thing to do.
Hmm.
And I've never really heard anyone talk about girls doing that.
Oh,
but I see it
I think
heavily applied in this movie, so I understand it.
absolutely. Yeah, I think it's like I kind of going back to what I said earlier about how like girls learn a different level of warfare socially, and it's something that gets explored a little bit more in the Mean Girl musical, where it's like you're allowed to like you can get into fights with girls, but you have to be sneaky about it. You have to be quiet about it. You can't like outright. And it's the same thing with like, bullying your crush. And so it's definitely all like a lot of these truths are universal to regardless of gender or gender identity. And I think it's something that it's interesting to get to have it explored in. And I think it's part of why we need representation in cinema beyond the male scope, because a lot of like if we had more of these conversations and had more of these kinds of movies through the lens of women, you'd actually see how common they are for either gender or every gender.
Yeah, I said it's such a male thing, and then for the first time in maybe 30 years, I've thought about this, that there was a girl who lived down the street that we used to hang out with, and I think it was only like in first or second grade, but at one point she like took me and threw me in the garage door and like punched me. And I told my parents, and like, oh, that means she likes you. I'm like, no, it doesn't. She hit me. And they're like,
Yeah.
and only now
Again,
do
it's
they
not
go,
something we
oh,
should encourage, but it does happen.
no. But like the clouds of memory parted. I'm like, girls
Yeah.
do that. They did it to
Yeah.
you.
Girls do that. It's I think it comes down to is it's something that we're like whether or not we're conditioned to do that, but I think it's and having that word like that's the aggressive affection I think is a great word because as kids we're so young we're processing all these new emotions, so like
Mhm.
that's part of why especially as early kids we resort to those physically, and because we don't have the language for that kind of feeling yet or the understanding that it's not acceptable to do so yet. And so it's definitely interesting to kind of unpack it and see how it evolves as we get older and like hopefully eventually realize that's not the way that you show affection and that it's not the way that you handle things, but
Fingers crossed.
as one can hope. But I do think it's an interesting evolution in terms of like as we mature you still see that in either gender.
So if
Oh.
from at least from your opinion, if Needy is in love with Jennifer,
Mhm.
Jennifer is in denial, isn't
I
ready
think
to accept her feelings.
I don't think either of them necessarily like are ready. I think it's both of them have their level of denial of
Denial.
whether or not.
To that, I would agree. I
I don't
I'm
think
just
it's definitely not a conversation of like who's more out and proud than the other. Like I definitely think it's because it's also a place like especially in the early 2000s like this was still an era in especially cinema of the hard F. Like there's a lot of that and a lot of content in especially like the kind of Van Wilders of the
mhm.
era, like it like so that language wouldn't have necessarily existed as much. We see it a little bit with But I'm a Cheerleader, and there's like sprinkles of other movies, but like for the most part like we were never going to get like an out and proud version of Jennifer's Body. And so like there's and like most kids of that age aren't going to be out and proud. Like I was in a rare bubble where I had plenty of friends that were out in high school, but we have to also think about like Devil's Kettle is supposed to be like your middle America, every like small town. So that would have even more so not existed.
Which is precisely why that girl just like leans over and accuses Needy in the opening scene, because like
Yeah.
who in that school, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, even like just the goth kid who's like into poetry is like the most
Mm-hmm.
eccentric
Yeah.
group of friends that school has. And absolutely, uh, the Chris Pratt character would be reacting to like a band with guyliner in that way.
Mm-hmm. Oh
No
yeah,
offense,
absolutely.
no offense to small towns. I'm just saying,
No, absolutely.
based
And I
on
think that's
what kind of things they're exposed to.
yeah. I think that also adds to like we were talking about earlier how she's perceived as popular. in a school like that's a small school. So like there's only so like I don't like I went to a school where there was like 4,000 in our graduating class, so I can't comment on small high schools in that way. But like from what I've gleaned, is there really isn't enough people in a school like that for there to be like a popular chasm or like a popular
Mhm.
sect of people. Um, I could be completely wrong. But yeah, I think that the aspect of it being a small town is part of what like makes it less like I wouldn't call her popular either. Like
Right. I I just off to me it's such an interesting character because if you're looking at this as a story of I don't want to say repression, but just whatever maybe bi or queer feelings they have is just maybe not fully developed, not ready to be fully admitted.
yeah.
There's certain aspects, like to me when Jennifer comes over, I think it's after like her second murder, and Needy's already had sex with Chip, which eventually leads to like the makeout scene. There's so much about her energy that is putting certain interests on Front Street that to me I have to wonder like how in denial the fact that she's saying we could play like was it mommy and daddy like we used to,
Mm-hmm.
that I mean if that's coming from her heart, how much is she really admitting to, or is how much of that is that the demon just manipulating Needy, in which case that just makes that whole exchange really sad.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a wonder because we obviously never see the demon like outside of the two of them. So it's also a wonder of like how much of the demon is a sentient being and how much of it is just influencing what's already there.
And I
Um,
love that it's nebulous. To me,
yeah,
some of the best horror doesn't explain anything, give you some fucking rules and a little box to follow. The
yeah.
lack of box and the lack of understanding is what always gets under my skin.
Oh, absolutely. That's part of why I don't like the Babadook.
Oh,
I wish we never saw it. It was far scarier when we didn't see it. The minute it was I was out.
that's fair. That's fair. I like the
It is
Babadook,
that
but
nebulous.
but
Yeah.
I've known some people that really bump up against Insidious because like it just seems like, well, any like what are the rules of the ghost? They're here, but then they're not. And I'm like, no, that's what's fucking scary about Insidious is
Yeah.
like I can't explain the rules at all.
Yeah.
Um,
I need to revisit Insidious, to be honest.
I love
Sir.
it. No, but
I liked
I
the makeups a lot.
not to get on a side tangent about Insidious, but I the first time I saw Insidious, I one of my favorite things about it, um, being aware of, I remember that was the first time I understood the name Jason Blum, and that
Mhm.
like here obviously the structure's changed a bit, but at the time it's like,
Yeah.
look, we rent a house or two, everyone gets scale, everyone has like a back end deal if it's a hit, actors drive themselves to set, we don't have like a great break room, but everyone just shows up to work. And the other thing is like, look, we don't have ghoulish appliances. It's very theatrical. It is white foundation and like shading on cheeks and circles around eyes. And it fucking works. It was inspirational in a way that like, look
Yeah.
what you can do with just this much, as long as you've got a story, and the right talent.
Yeah. I mean, that's like the same thing you can be said about like, not that I ever really got into it, but paranormal and
Oh,
activity.
absolutely.
Like that first movie was made for like $300 or something crazy like that, like all in camera and wild. So it's like
Well,
I love horror where like when it can just be effective because of just creative choices.
Oren Peli, who did that, produced Insidious, and James Wan had made movies up until that point, but
Mhm.
Insidious didn't feel like any other James Wan movie, and I think it's
Yeah.
because Oren Peli's approach, like the fucking further, is just I don't even know if it's a sound, like did they rent a soundstage and they just filled it with fog? That's all it is.
Yeah.
Very effective.
Practical is so good. Bring
Um,
back more practical at the end. That's my stance on this whole movie too.
uh, I agree with you on that.
Mm,
Practical's always fun. Uh,
yeah.
although VFX are also nice. when done well. I only say that
right,
because I have
yeah.
a girlfriend in the VFX industry.
I love it when it's done in conjunction well. Like that's my like I think that both tools on their own can be really cool, but I think when they're paired together, it's even better.
Oh yeah, there've been
So,
a handful of really really good examples of
yeah.
I don't know. Red Skull in Captain America First Avenger. We did a lot with appliances. Then we go in and we can't get his cheeks to sink in that much.
Yeah. Well, like, they do it really well with a lot of zombie stuff or like a lot of gore stuff where it's like the actual practical effects are only enhanced by like then we digitally removed the rest of his body
oh
or
yeah, yeah.
like
think,
we made the spinal column wag. Part of it was animatronic, but then we like did a little extra, like that kind of stuff.
oh, one of my favorites is Where the Wild Things Are. Like Jim Henson Company just built these giant amazing things. We digitally manipulated their eyes and mouths and stuff, but it's still like a
Yeah.
suits and giant suits. I think the thing that lately, and this is I think when it's a tool, especially when it's in service of the story and not just cheating. But I think it was, I don't know if it was Hellboy 2 or if it was the newer Hellboy, but he was shirtless. And I remember thinking like, well, that's all not, there's no way that's all one giant piece. That's pieces, right? So where are the seams? Where the fuck are the seams where the arm? And then I found out later, oh, well, it's an arm, it's a chest. We just digitally cleaned up the seams. And I went, well, that's neat.
That would have been the remake because the first 1 and 2 were both actually a suit.
That's, I mean, to me, that's already impressive. But
yeah, he was in that.
Obviously, you know, there are people whose job it is to blend seams, but like if it's something that can't be done, hey,
hi, hello.
If it can't be done, that's a tool. And if it's not to cut a corner, but it's to make something work in the service of story, great.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I actually really I did like in terms of VFX, Ursula for the new Little Mermaid was beautiful.
That's what I heard. I haven't seen it.
I would never, it's one of those things where like you can't like there are limitations to makeup and there are limitations to practical effects. And there, you know, I do think that there is a place to be had for VFX. Not to say that I'm a complete like no VFX altogether. So just FYI.
Very nice. Well, one of the things, I mean, at the dawn of the 21st century, but as you know, CGI, you know, made its mark in the early 90s and then just continued to grow and grow and grow. You used to hear this conversation, right? Of like,
yeah,
well, this is going to be the end of special effects and makeup. This is going to be the end of special effects and makeup. And I kept hearing that. And while I don't doubt there was a dip, there also was a rise. There was a rise of filmmakers like Guillermo del Toro and plenty others who are still to this day employing fantastic. Look at the original Lord of the Rings trilogy before the fucking Hobbit trilogy made all the orcs digital. There's still year after year interesting work being done.
Oh, absolutely.
Even last year, Smile has this. Did you see Smile?
I did see Smile. I enjoyed it for the most part. Yeah, I thought it was
some
really
weird ass shit at the end of that movie though that I was not expecting, and
yeah, I knew people involved, so I'm not going to say too much. But
fair enough. Fair enough.
But some of the like end pieces, I was a little, but it's more like the thing about like any art is subjective. So like my cup of tea is not necessarily like it was well executed, but not necessarily my choice of design.
I have a very interesting guest here because I can talk whatever shit I want and then realize, oh,
it's very much like, oh, I don't want to say something too harsh because like I know the person that applied it.
Well, I'm also just afraid I might say something's awesome and you're like, well, actually, you know.
Oh,
but,
no,
but for every Evil Dead, like Evil Dead Rise and the Evil Dead remake, that just, you know, employ a lot of practical stuff on set.
Yeah.
There's still the fear of the erasure of effects still exists.
100%.
I'll give you two examples. One
especially with implementation of AI now. So
all right. The
this is no longer a Jennifer's Body podcast. No.
we'll come back to it, folks. The thing that was the prequel / remake, where like they built all this incredible stuff and then they replaced like most of it with digital.
Yeah.
So yeah, your fear is valid. Same thing with Blade 2, which a movie I fucking love, but there's a lot of close-ups of the Reaper vampires that they built these full animatronic heads, and they're amazing. And then they're like, yeah, and then just for whatever reason we replaced it digitally, and I'm like, bummer, because when you look at the making of behind the scenes stuff, it's a full like seam that splits and articulates. And I mean, granted, it's in a work, but what I'm looking at in that workshop looks so much cooler than the little cartoon that's doing that.
Oh, absolutely.
3 seconds.
Well, a lot of it too is like people don't take into consideration is like pre-production, post-production, or pre-production, production, and post-production are typically 3 separate budgets. So a lot of the times they'll like say like, oh, we don't want to spend this amount of money during pre-production, and then it ends up being like thrown into post-production where they spend like who knows how much money on VFX and stuff like that, because that person budgeting or whoever's handling pre-production isn't really caring about what's happening on post-production's end. So that's typically where you end up seeing the difference, and also too, editing comes into play as well. And like also, but that's again, all of it's budgeting, because like the person who's doing actual, during production, they're like, I don't want to worry about this now. This is a specific budget. So let's make post-production its problem. So
the more you know.
Money, it's all money.
Just a random thought. I'm going to bring us back to Jennifer's Body.
Bring us back.
It just something made me chuckle that I never noticed until this most recent viewing. Thank God, I've seen this movie 5 times now. I don't know. But when they're getting ready to set up for, I want to call it prom, but isn't it technically like a spring fling or something? I don't know. In the background, I noticed the school is putting on, they have a poster for their production of Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. And I'm like, whatever set decorator or designer came up with that. One, I want to see a high school production of that.
That'd be warped, and I love it.
And 2, though, I mean, it's kind of funny that they're both incredibly complicated, toxic female relationships.
Yeah,
that's just a good gag. There's, I mean, all to say that between, I think Juno. I want to. Oops, I almost said Juno Temple. Diablo Cody, writing a very intentional, focused script. There's nothing casual. Everything's very well thought out.
Absolutely.
A director who's very intentional with nothing about this seems aloof. All to say that so much so that even your background gag poster kind of is clever and has a point. It could have just been thrown away or not even been included. And that's one of the things I really like about this movie is the fact that it's men are supporting characters, female leads, female director, female writer. I almost would, I don't want to say like female gaze, but as a male, there's things about this that feel foreign visually, that feels like this is being told from a very female intent.
Oh, absolutely. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think also the cinematographer was female as well.
I can't correct you because I don't know.
Or, okay, so I think, don't quote me, I believe the cinematographer is as well. I'd have to look it up, but I'm pretty sure. I've listened to a couple podcasts at this point that have also covered Jennifer's Body, and I want to say one of them said so. I usually do a little more research, but I'm pretty sure.
I hate to be the bearer of bad news.
Oh, who was it? No, was it
M. David Mullen?
There was one other besides director that was female.
Wouldn't surprise me if it was producer. That would make the most sense.
It might have been producer. I remember there was an aspect. There's someone else, but I have to go back and look.
Yeah. One of the things I keep coming back to this movie is just this, and it can be viewed in a very like, what? They're just 2 girls and they're friends, or like clearly they're in love with each other and they need to have a deeper conversation. But either prism Pardon me?
Gals being pals, sorry.
No. But through either prism, the conflicts are still the same conflicts. Like one doesn't become like, well, if you read into it, like, no matter
Mhm.
what, I still have to wonder, like, I mean, no matter what, you're still rooted in either a friendship or something more that is rooted in jealousy, that is rooted
Mhm.
in uh, you know, moments of beautiful connection and then moments of manipulation and pettiness.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
and like the, as the story progresses into something about, well, I need to feed on boys to sustain my energy. Um, she's choosing to go after, like, I'm not interested in that goth boy. And then Needy goes, well, I think he's cool. Oh, you think he's cool. Well,
Yeah.
now I want to go eat him.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, you love your boyfriend? Well, now I want to go eat him. Like, there's something where you're choosing. And again, it comes down to, well, is the demon just that fucking mean? Or at her heart, is Jennifer that mean? Or in her heart of hearts, is Jennifer jealous of any male attention that isn't towards her from Needy? You tap your nose, but I mean, these are the questions that, like, and then once you go with that, how much you want to
Yeah.
unpack about their friendship, uh
Yeah.
the nature of their friendship, the why of it, and
Mhm.
it's a lot to chew on.
Pun intended.
Oh, I didn't even.
Um, yeah, I definitely think in my read of the story, I do think it comes to from a place of like Needy is mine. Like,
Mhm.
you could interpret it as she's jealous of Needy, but I think those are also two sides of the same coin. I
Well,
think,
she actually might be a little bit, yeah.
yeah. Well, and I think that's part of what is so great about the different layers of this movie, and specifically the relationship with Needy and Jennifer, is like she could be jealous of Needy. She could be in love with Needy. That could be her best friend. All of those things can be true, while all of those things can be like neither one of those things are negated if either one of those things are true. She could still be in love with Needy and be jealous of her, and
Absolutely.
and think she's a friend. She could still be a friend. It's one of those things where the Venn diagram is a circle.
Yeah.
Um,
I just try to figure out, like, what is it that she's jealous of Needy for having. And part of me has to wonder if it's like, how do you get up every day and not put in the effort that I do and still
mhm.
have a chip?
Yeah, exactly.
You know?
Like at the end of the day, she has a stable relationship, whereas Jennifer doesn't. Like she has to see Jennifer be in love and be with this person, and this person love her back. And even though she's the hot girl of the school, she doesn't have like, yes, she's getting attention from guys, but she's not getting the attention that Needy is, where it's an authentic, genuine connection. They just see her as an object to attain, whereas like Chip sees her for who she is. And I think that that's probably that. I if I were in her shoes, like I would absolutely be jealous of that if that's from where I'm coming from.
Yeah. And it's interesting that this relationship has gone on as long as it had. Not to make everything I say a reference to stand up, but when it comes to healthy expressions of your emotions and not bottling things up, I remembered um, Tracy Morgan had a bit about how him and his wife, like, dude, we fight, we hash it out. You have to, because if you don't, you're just a quiet couple. And then, like, one day she just stabs you, you know? And I look at how long this friendship has gone on for, and we find out that even through childhood, there's been, you know, moments of sweetness with the blood and please don't tell my mom. But then there's also these moments of like, you remember when you pissed on my bed? Like, so there's been shittiness. And I just look at all of this.
Yeah.
And at some point, Needy needed to have said, like, hey, there's been some bullshit. There's been some control that I haven't appreciated, but that never comes up until the end of this movie when it's literally just a balls out fight and I fucking stabbed you.
Yeah.
And again, if she has a conversation, we don't have that movie, but there is like almost a lesson to be learned with how much you allow someone to walk all over you, how much you don't express feelings that you need to express. And if you don't, shit could just blow up.
Yeah. This is a rule for creating healthy boundaries.
I don't know if that was the intention of this movie, but it's certainly there.
Oh, absolutely.
Another thing that's there that I just want to kind of dive into for a moment. Some people bump into it. I don't really don't, but it's like in Juno, like how there's like a whole like Diablo Cody language that's sort of happening, a lot of weird slang that only
Diablo
exists.
speak.
Yeah, Diablo speak. It sneaks in here, and for the most part, I'm pretty good with it.
Yeah, I think the cool thing about it, and I listened to a podcast not too long ago where that um discussed it and talked about how like it kind of creates its own time period. It allows it to exist in a realm that like the language is so far from left field of what we're used to hearing that it doesn't date itself like other colloquial slang would. And I think that's a really interesting choice. And like in Juno, she does it also in how her art department handles like there's a rotary telephone, not a rotary telephone, but like the hamburger phone. And like I need to go back and rewatch Jennifer's Wanting to see if she does it in this case, where it's like a lot of the choice of using older technology makes it feel like it could exist in any time period where it doesn't have to just exist. Like we don't see them, to my knowledge, using a technology that really changes what era we're looking at. And I think that that's a cool way of making it accessible to kind of anyone. And like it allows the movie to not, like, I would say if anything makes this movie aged is the fashion. Because it's definitely like rooted in that early 2000s, at least with specifically with Jennifer's character. But like I think Diablo subverts it when she puts Needy in that like 80s prom dress. Because then you're like, well, this is very era inappropriate, no matter like if it's early 2000s or if it's 90s or if it's later. So it's like, I think so just to answer my own question, she does try to subvert it a little bit with the fashion, where it's like, and like I think also that's part of the like the brilliance of the language she uses, because it is so uniquely her own language. It allows the movie to kind of exist in this nebulous time period that doesn't date it so much.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the dress, because for as contemporary as it can be and as timeless some of the words are, that dress is very dated. And also, like at one point, I forget the name of the, is it Chris Pratt, or there's a guy who's like a cop that she's like been banging. I think it's Chris Pratt's character.
It is Chris Pratt, yes.
But she refers to him as Gomer, and I'm like, okay, that's a fucking dated reference. Like,
yeah,
what kid in the 2000s knows Gomer Pyle? But like, again, we're kind of mixing things up a little bit. It's a hodgepodge, and that's just I don't know, but there's a lot of random shit to me that I think, I don't know if it'll age well, but it's already been what, like a decade. And
yeah,
yeah, I think it was 2006.
Yes, I believe so.
But yeah, there's just like a lot of random, like, I don't think it ever became a term, at least not to my knowledge, to have a weddie. But
God, it's so gross.
You get it, and you laugh.
Yeah.
I've never heard the word freak-tarded in my life, you know.
And I think that's also one that, like, because we no longer use that word, like, very quickly aged itself out.
Yeah. I only felt comfortable saying it because it's only half the word, but
yeah.
But there's so much. I mean, we've talked a lot about a lot of things, but this movie's so fucking funny. God damn, it's really funny. To me, everything can be encapsulated as far as the level, because it's not necessarily jokes, but like, what kind of car did she drive off in? Like, what were they driving? She's like, I don't know, an '89 rapist. Like, the fact that you can make a joke out of a very dangerous situation, but I don't know, it's a very unique needle to thread. But there's so much humor in this movie that's rooted in either murder or female assault or struggles of fucking daily female friendships, and to tell that story and to still diffuse it with certain
Yeah.
beats of humor,
Yeah. Well, even if you think
that's a
about
hell of
it,
a thing to try to do.
yeah, if you think about like a lot of the lines that are I'm forgetting his name, but our hook teacher,
Oh yeah, yeah.
like a lot of his like talk going back to
Oh,
like the humor in rooted in no, I'm blanking on his name. That this is the notes I need to take or just note names. That's always my issue.
names are the worst for me.
But he a lot of his humor is rooted in kind of the morose aspects that are happening around the school. It's about like mourning the people in, you know, the fire. It's about you know, the football jock mourning his best buddy, and like, and even in that one you can kind of interpret a little bit of homoeroticism as well because of like the response and the reaction, so which I think is interesting, and it kind of reminds me of like Heather's in that way,
Oh yeah.
um, where and like whether or not that was an intentional and or it could very well just be my affinity for Heather's, and like, you know, I love my dead gay son, um, but there is also that kind of like small town like Sherwood, Ohio, like Devil's Kettle kind of can fit in that like kind of same, you know, niche of communities as well. Um, but I think it's interesting that like we do see a lot of his humor is rooted in very dark kind of moments.
I mean, this is not the first movie, but it's definitely yeah, there's something. I wasn't prepared for this movie to be kind of a satire on grief or performative grief, when it comes to,
Mhm.
like, you know, the band and the
Yeah.
way the nation and the small town. Um, God, I didn't make the Heather's connection till right now, but yeah.
I honestly that was the first time I've made it.
Right on.
As we're going.
Um,
But
I mean, I don't necessarily need to keep going back to this, but one of the things I find really interesting once my eyes opened to it was once we get to the nature of the relationship, there's so many things where, like, now when I look at their fight at the end, the second they start to levitate, it seems like there's a very audible, like, it becomes very breathy. Um,
mhm.
and I go, there's two people rolling and breathing heavy, and the fact that the initial appearance at the kitchen involves her like smelling her and about to bite her, like there's it gets bitey.
Mhm.
If you didn't if you didn't pick up on anything before, I challenge you to not pick up on it by the end.
There it is.
I get it, but the other thing that it took me a long time to recognize, and I'm sure this is intentional, but Needy and Chip are having sex. Jennifer and Goth Boy, she's gonna murder him.
Mhm.
We've already established, even before she's possessed by a demon or anything, that like there's a mental connection between them. So by the time she's killing Goth Guy and she's having this where she's starting to, like, you know, panic and scream, it's one thing where it's funny that the guy that Chip thinks it's him, but only recently did I also go, yeah, it's a funny moment, and yeah, we're establishing that there's a connection between her, that Needy's understanding what's happening with Jennifer, so the plot's about to move forward. But also, again, light bulb, the fact that she's having sex with her boyfriend and essentially thinking of another woman, and that her thoughts are leading to sounds that could be construed as sexual, like, message that, like, for like a long time, because the scene doesn't play it that way, but like when you
No,
look
it
at
doesn't.
when you look at the facts, you go, oh, I don't know, it's a movie where I went, oh, a lot in you know, over time.
Onions have layers.
Onions have layers, and sometimes it takes me a while to catch up to them.
I mean, every time I watch this movie, I find something new to be like, oh shit, or like, oh, that's interesting, or like, I think that that's probably what makes it such a good movie for me is its rewatchability. Like I always go back to it and be like, oh, there's something new or there's a nuance I didn't catch. And I think that's so great to kind of unpack.
I would say that 1,000% for me. And in fact, that's why I keep going back to it. And I'm not even talking about big thematic things. Like I just only realized that Devil's Kettle, their team is the Devils. And I'm like, it just makes me chuckle now. Like every time, like what a redundant, stupid name, the Devil's Kettle Devils. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, it also is like it's you don't necessarily notice it so much because their color palette doesn't speak to it being the Devils at
No,
all.
it's
Like it's
purple and
purple
yellow,
and
right?
yellow. Yeah. Which you're just like, okay. I'm wondering what the reasoning for that choice was. I don't have an answer to that. I'm just
Yeah,
wondering
I
now.
don't either. I don't either. Yeah, one of the bigger things that I still have to unpack is that not unpack. Maybe this is my bullshit, but I've accused Jennifer so much of being the toxic one, right? And of being petty or manipulative at times. And and how sometimes things aren't completely one-sided. And I'm not going to accuse Needy of necessarily having her own toxicity, but to me, there's something really telling when Jennifer is seducing Chip, and she has to stop him and be like, "Tell me I'm better than Needy," and I just like stop and go, "Oh, fuck, all right."
Yeah.
But to me, that intention to me, like the bedroom fight isn't the climax of the movie. It's the pool scene is like the emotional climax of the movie.
Oh
Because
yeah.
while I have that seed planted in my head and she starts flying and Edie's like, well, she's just hovering. And I start to understand from Jennifer's perspective, maybe the lack of, I don't want to say validation, but her own form of like toxicity where I don't want to necessarily say that Jennifer feels stupid in comparison to her, but even in this, even like when I'm flying, it's like, don't tell me like me flying's not impressive, you know?
I
Um,
mean, yeah, absolutely. You can see it too when she mentions the Snow Queen and she's like, we were still socially relevant. It's like, even though, Needy's not exactly like blameless in their relationship either. It's
exactly.
like while it does get the a brunt that we see, there still is like these little digs that Needy does. And like I think there is an aspect of Needy feeling superior against Jennifer because she is the smart,
Mm-hmm.
not, she like I think there's a self-awareness to Jennifer that like Needy is jealous of, while at the same time like still feeling like superior to her because again she has the boyfriend, she's the smart one. We don't, but we also don't know like how well Jennifer does in in school. But like there's the things that Jennifer prioritizes is different to what Needy prioritizes, and I think that there is something to say that like maybe there is a reason that Jennifer feels jealous, and like a part of that comes from Needy finding ways to poke holes in in what she is proud of.
Right. When whether she's meaning to, or I mean, to a certain degree, I think she kind of is, but she doesn't recognize how damaging it might be to Jennifer.
Yeah, because
But
Jennifer seems so confident, and Jennifer seems like she's got this like armor on her.
yeah, the fact that she says like, "Do you have to undermine everything I do?" It's this funny kind of beat that she calls her a player hater, but like take away the humor, and to me, that's the moment you realize not just the jealousy, but like how insecure she is underneath all that.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Oh
never
yeah.
really, and you always hear the sort of like idea. I say here because it's not part of my experience, but people who seem maybe supremely confident or secretly insecure about whatever reasons. And I know,
Yeah.
that's totally a thing, but I didn't really apply that to Jennifer. And then that to me, that pool scene is just everything.
Oh, absolutely.
And also, besides being a fun horror movie, besides being funny, Because tonally, this movie's interesting. It doesn't play by a lot of standard like movie rules. It kind of, I mean, that's one of the things I like about it, is like, fuck you, I'm gonna make it how exactly I want to make it. Anyway, so between the humor and the horror, there's also a lot of genuine, like when Chip's dying, like Needy breaks my heart every time I watch
Yeah.
that scene. And it's, again, it pivots from like, hey, do you have a tampon, to like 1 minute later, this like angsty death scene, and it all works. Uh,
Hmm.
in fact, that was my big note when I went to the test screening, because I had only seen and my names are escaping me, but you know, Needy is played by
Amanda Seyfried.
Amanda Seyfried, and
Seyfried.
I always call her Seyfried. Yeah.
Yeah.
I had only seen her in Mean Girls, which I think came out 2 years prior. I was not prepared for her to be that good in this movie.
Oh yeah. Her
I knew
range
that
is great.
this movie lives or dies by her performance, and it demands so much from her. Not to say that Megan Fox isn't killing it for what her role requires, but even all these years later, this is probably my favorite Amanda Seyfried performance.
Oh, I'd
I,
agree.
it's a lot, I think, for what her character has to go through, that I don't think gets enough credit for like what you'd have to bring that level of truth to it. Like,
Oh yeah.
fuck. And I know it's just like, well, you know, there's this girl and she eats people, and no, there's, I don't know, there's a lot of heartbreak when I think about what she'd have to go to and bring to set every day. Like, it's an outstanding
Yeah.
lead role.
Oh, in the same way that I think Megan Fox commits to Jennifer, I think Amanda fully commits to everything that Needy needs as a character. Good movie, man.
It's so good.
Such a
So
good
good.
movie.
I'm glad that it's found its place all these years later. You know, not to get to the trivia, but like, we know it bombed, or at least
Yeah.
didn't do great, you know, and people found it for however, the fact that all these years later it's risen to like, to the to like cult. I don't even know. Is it even like a cult film anymore? I think enough people have
Um,
found it that like,
I mean, a cult classic, it really comes down to it not having done well in its initial release and then getting a resurgence. So I think it is the very definition of a cult classic. Absolutely.
okay.
I think I would call it a modern cult classic for sure. Because and I think it still has room to grow in terms of its reception with audiences. I think the queer audience in particular has done a lot to help bring it to, I think, the mainstream.
Yeah, I would absolutely say that. And I thought I had another sentence and I don't. I just hope it keeps growing.
Okay.
And how do I say this? Hopefully, I don't want to say it's hopefully the last of its kind, but I have a friend of mine that I talk to about when some movies come out and they're like, hey, this is a big studio movie and there's like this one gay character and they did a gay thing for like 30 seconds. Representation. And and these little achievements that she'll be like, hey, but like this happened. And I go, yeah, that's cool. Can I ask you something? And she's like, yeah. And I'm like, do you ever get tired of these little milestones and just wish we could just skip to like, I don't know, the lead character is just gay and that's it? She's like, well, of course, absolutely. As I hope more movies can go towards that, I'm not trying to justify the fear and suppression of things, but there is an interesting period in media where we don't want to say the thing, so we have
Yeah.
to code the thing.
Oh, absolutely.
And that has forced certain movies to get very creative. And because of that creativity, we've had some unique pieces of art. And I would consider Jennifer's Body to be one of them. And I'm glad that it exists in a way that you and I could be here talking about it. I just hope we don't have to keep making movies like that fucking 30 years from now where everything's still coded.
Oh, absolutely not. I talk about this a lot with my partner, with other, film buffs, or I'm like, I am tired of us having to grasp at straws. and like just that little like shrapnel of queer representation isn't enough anymore. And I
Really
think if
isn't.
anything, like yes, we do exist in our like in our niches, but I think it's important that we do see, like you said, just matter of fact queer, matter of fact gay, matter of fact whatever, because that representation opens up to so much more conversation, and we start to see it kind of like, I think of like entertainment and like Hollywood as like a trickle down effect. Like yeah, we start to see it a little bit because it's in like the West Coast and or in like the metropolitan areas, we see that, and then it starts to bleed outwards. And I think we need to get to a point where it gets, the impact's bigger, because that trickle effect isn't, like if you just have that little morsel, it's not gonna trickle as far. If you have just
Mm.
matter of fact, it's gonna like, the lasting power, it can be more effective because it can find its way into smaller places.
Yeah, and you talk about like the trickle. You're talking about coastal elites, but the but I'm also, you're talking about geographically, but I also think about time
Hmm.
and the amount of repetition and viewing, and then that leading to the next movie, and that leading to the next movie over time, trickling hopefully across the ages, if
Like
you
you can
will.
see it with like even box office numbers. Like we like, I'm hoping we'll see it with a Barbie movie where we get more. I mean, we're going to unfortunately get more of the like, here's your childhood doll we put and brought to life in a movie, like with it, we're getting with Polly Pocket.
Polly Pocket, yeah.
So I know we're gonna get that influence from Barbie movie, but like I want to see it where we're like, we're seeing a female led, female directed, female like centered movie do like $400 million in a weekend. This is the power of female cinema. Same thing with like, people of color, with you see Black Panther or, like any other movie, like look at how marketable this, microcosm of people is, or macrocosm, I don't know what you would call it. But like look how profitable it is. Let's make more movies geared towards these people. And I think that if we can see that happen with queer content as well, look at the almighty dollar, look at how profitable this, and like we see it with Pride, with all of our, like
Oh, the
with
Target
all of,
section.
yes, so you see all of that happen, but it's like, okay, but this dollar exists every other day of the year too, and you're stupid to not tap into that dollar. If we are as capitalistic as we seem to be,
Yeah.
and we are, like, you're stupid for not marketing to us every other day of the year, because we still exist throughout the rest of the year. So hopefully, like the more we get influence with queer content, it's no longer just the like, we got ourselves a gay. Like it's just matter of fact, here's this content. And yes, there's going to be pushback, like there is even with women in cinema, like let alone, queer people. But I think like having just not just the shred of queer, have it being bigger statements, I think can do so much more, obviously. But
Yeah. Yeah. Here's what I'm hoping for. Because everything you said, yay. You have independent cinema, and then you
Mhm.
have movies, let's say like I think it was called Love, Simon, where I don't know, cost maybe like 10 to 30 million.
Yeah.
Like that was nice. Like that's made by a studio. It had some stars. What I need to do is I need my Love, Simon to be in $100 million movie, so that it's not just like, oh, we defeated the bad guys and look, two girls kissed in the background for a second as we celebrate. Like I need that $100 million movie to have, the same just basic story commitment that a Love, Simon would.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's my hope. Or here's my other hope. You're talking about like Barbie and what big business it did. Biggest hit from a female director ever, which is great. Fucking love it. It's also based on an IP, right?
Yeah.
That's part of the
Mhm.
success, is just that
Oh, 100%.
multiple generations all know what Barbie is.
Yep.
What I'm hoping for is as we talk about like the dying of the director as a star, and like the last few we have like Nolan, we have Tarantino, but it used to be like we were going to go see the new whatever movie. I feel like
Spielberg or yeah.
as that's dying out, it feels like Jordan Peele is like the new, like, oh, I'm hoping we get to a point where like Greta Gerwig or someone can open a movie just on her name and
I think
not
she's
just
getting
the
there.
IP. Yeah, that's what I'm hoping for.
Yeah. I think she's getting there because most of her work has been, if not critically well received, but I think it's also done pretty well as well.
But we can say these directors' last names. And we'll go, oh yeah, 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 Spielberg.
Yeah.
And go, ooh,
Yeah.
and it's just a bunch of dudes.
Yeah. I mean,
I
and
just
that's
hope
just,
in my lifetime I get to see something
yeah.
shift where we can just simply go, oh, like Gerwig,
Yeah.
like it's a culture, and it's not tied to anything but just fucking her. And if it's not her, someone else.
Yeah.
That's all.
I definitely like because you can even see like the Jordan Peele effect with the new Candyman. Like that wasn't directed by him. That was
No,
Nia DaCosta.
yeah,
Like and it's still like I, I'm grateful for him to like put her on the higher pedestal, but it needs to at some point be a thing where it's like, okay, yes, you're producing it, but take a step back. Like
yeah.
allow this person that spotlight that they so like rightfully deserve. And I think it does also come from a place of like it's still a heavily weighted, man's game in the film industry as well. Like it's so much harder for a woman to even get the opportunity to direct, let alone, anything else. And then you see that backlash when it does happen. So I too hope we get to a place where we're not also like in the same way that the queer community is grasping at straws. I think there's just, women in general do as well sometimes. Sigh.
Period.
Period. Hold on.
Mic drop, gavel down.
The puppy's awake.
This is the best episode ever.
Yay. I was gonna say like, oh, I have to pick her up, otherwise she will do something mischief.
I could see some toe beans.
She also likes Jennifer's Body.
Jennifer's Body, good movie.
Good movie.
I'm going to thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me. This was fun.
Yeah, I had a really good time. And also about not talking about Jennifer's Body for a bunch of other fun things.
Yeah.
Do you want to tell people where they can find you, what your socials or your website might be?
Yeah, so you can find me at Keaghlan Ashley on Instagram, pretty much KeaglanAshley.com. Anywhere you can find me, it's Keaghlan Ashley. My name's, I'm going to assume, would be in the title or in the comments or
And it's going to be right below you.
down below. So
Yeah.
just copy and paste my name, throw it into the interwebs, and you'll find me because I'm the only one.
Well, thanks once again for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Have a good one, everybody. Oh, I like to sign off by doing raspberries. It's just an immature thing. So if you want to make a little fart sound with your mouth, go for it. Yeah.
Bye.